What's going on, guys? Pat here, and in this episode of the engine swap series, we're finally getting started on the mock-up phase. So as I've said in the first couple episodes in the swap series, the LS7 isn't going to be a direct bolt-in swap. There's some fabrication work involved, and while it's nothing crazy, it is stuff that requires careful measurements and needs to be thought out so that the engine can be nicely integrated into the car and not just sloppily thrown in there. And spoiler alert, but we've already kind of begun on it. Now, the two big fabrication things that need to be focused on when we're doing the swap is A, the oil pan, and B, the mounting of the dry sump tank, which is what we're working on here, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But the first thing is kind of exclusive to using an LS7 with the factory style dry sump, and that is the pan hitting the steering linkage, which you can see. Maybe the engine's also hand wrapped, so it's kind of hard to see, but the pan sticks down pretty far. All LS engines have clearance issues on the steering linkage. That's why like Holley sells the swap pan and it's very popular. But the LS7 especially, I think that pan's like 6/10 of an inch deeper than a non-dry sump, like an LS3 stock style pan. And the reason for that is the oil pump pickup tube is integrated into the pan. It's cast in, so it's deeper in that area to accommodate it. So it's not really something I can mill away to get the clearance back. Even if I milled that area like 1/3 of an inch, I still wouldn't have the clearance I need. And the issue comes in here where you can see this link, how it's kind of angled upward. Well, it hits here, and then if you go to turn it, it only gets worse because it's angled upwards, and then you get into like this greasable joint here. So you literally can't turn the wheels in the car, and that's even with these UMI mounts set all the way back. I forget how much setback is built into them, but I had them all the way back and it was still nowhere close to clearing. Now, I've seen people say you could add plates under the mounts or on the engine side, and I've seen people do that for other LS swaps, but I don't really want to do that. I don't want to raise the center of gravity and lift up the engine and drivetrain. So ultimately we opted on setting the engine back, which unfortunately means cutting the firewall. Now, before I started filming, kind of in between the last video and this one, we set the engine in the car and got measurements, so we know how far back we need to go. In order to get it to clear the steering linkage comfortably, we're going to go about 3 inches back from the factory position. So you can see we have a set of mock-up holes drilled in here. These are the factory holes behind it. See, this is about 3 inches back. Now the firewall, the cut looks weird because this is like the factory heater core hose, but this is really the area we're focused on. We're going to go about 4 inches recessed. We're going to go a little more than what we're setting the engine back, just so we have a little clearance back there if we need to get back there for something, serviceability, stuff like that. I don't want it to be like flush on the firewall. And they make pre-made panels that kind of integrate in this area. They're universal ones, so we're going to cut it up to fit, but I mean, we're already cutting everything up, so it doesn't really matter. And in the same time that we're in here, we're going to cut the trans tunnel out. It was super tight on the T56 with the old setup. I intentionally had made it super snug, and while it worked for that, it wasn't really ideal. And now the engine's getting set back, the angles aren't going to match up like I had them, so I'm just going to cut it out and start from scratch. I have a better way to do that, which I'll get into when we get to that. But that's really going to be all we're doing for the engine as far as setback goes. Now, we might run into some weird issues. Like I have LS swap headers from American Racing headers, but maybe they'll hit like the controller mounts or something since we're set back. That's stuff we're going to figure out once we actually have the drivetrain actually mocked up in the car, which will come later in this video. Now, the other big thing that we got to be focused on is mounting the dry sump tank, which is going to go here. That's why it's all cut away. I had originally talked about kind of mounting it maybe in this area in the core support, kind of opposite the battery, but I didn't really like that in the end. The more I thought about it, it's not great from a weight standpoint. You're putting weight over the front of the nose, way in front of the front axle, which you really don't want to do. That's probably the worst spot. So I thought about other areas. I didn't want to do it in the passenger compartment. That's not really safe. And this isn't like an all-out race car, at least yet. But even if this was, I still wouldn't put the oil tank anywhere in the passenger compartment. I don't like that from a safety perspective. And the other popular thing is maybe putting it like all the way back in the trunk, kind of over the rear diff. But I'd have to upsize the lines a bunch to deal with I think it's friction and also pressure drop, and also you might have to run like a secondary scavenging pump to get it to go through the lines, which again, I don't really want to do. I don't want to introduce unnecessary complexity into the system. So I like this area the best. The outlet, or the supply and return rather, on the pan will be about here. So it's gonna be a super short run over here. Now this is cut out to exactly what we need. This is kind of covering the hole for the engine, or from the engine into the interior. We're gonna cut all of this out and replace it anyways, so this is all gonna get cut out, and we're gonna redo it. But depth wise, this is pretty good, so we're gonna pretty much mount onto this plane here, which I can pull this out so you can actually see it. So basically this depth here is good, so we're going to cut this out here and go in a new panel all the way down, so obviously it'll seal this off. We'll gusset all this in since we've taken material out. And when the tank's mounted there, I sized it and we've mounted it such that it'll still be further in to clear the door and the fender, below the cowl, all that good stuff. So it's not the best from an accessibility standpoint, like getting into drain the oil or check oil level is going to be a bit of a pain, but it's not the end of the world. I have a long-term fix coming for that, but that's going to be in mods coming later this year. It's not coming right now. So for at least the spring and summer, I'm just going to have to suck it up and take the wheel well off, take the wheel off to check oil level, which, I mean, it's really not that big of a deal, but it is what it is right now. So that's really where we're at as far as the mock-up phase. We're gonna have other things like radiators and plumbing, but just to get the engine actually installed in the car, that's gonna be all the work we're gonna have to do. Yeah, it sucks that you know, we just painted and bodyworked the Firewall last year, and we're gonna have to do it again. And now we're introducing more issues like how we're gonna run a wiper motor and stuff like that. But we'll deal with that as we get there. This is what we need to do to get this in the car, so that's really gonna be top priority. So I'm gonna go ahead, get some of this wiring out of the way, get this cleaned up, get the trans tunnel all cut out, and then I'll check in with you guys once we have the drivetrain actually all mocked up in the car. All right, well, here we are. Got the drivetrain mocked up in the car for the first time. Figure I'd take you guys around, show you what we're looking for, what I like, what I don't like, all that good stuff. So obviously we got the engine in. We have it bolted in the two mock-up bolt holes we had. It's holding the engine fine. Everything looks good as far as setback here. I don't know if you can see the linkage too well, but this is at full lock turning left. So towards the driver's side, and we clear easily. I mean, honestly, we could probably move the engine forward a little bit, but I'm not going to do that from a weight distribution standpoint. I want it, you know, as far back as we can get it comfortably. So that's good. Steering linkage problem is fixed by the about 3.5 inch sump back that we did. So that was the biggest issue I was talking about in the last video and in the intro video. So I'm glad that's taken care of. So as far as setback goes, we're far enough back. So now just looking through other areas as clearance. I'd actually bend the floor back a little bit because these are headers that are meant for just a, you know, regular position LS swap. So they're routed to have clearance, you know, when the engine's in its normal position. So some things get weird with it moved so far back. So we're gonna have to cut that out and just indent the floor. I just bent it so it wasn't laying on the header while we had the engine in the car. This is the first time mocking up with the headers, just an idea of where we're at clearance wise. On the driver's side, you can't really see it. It doesn't hit the floor on this side like it does on the passenger side, but up under the car on the trans cross member brace, which is part of the frame bracing kit we put in last year, it hits that, so we're gonna have to notch it a little bit. But nothing too crazy there. The headers fit pretty good. I was worried we're gonna have some clearance issues with those, but looking in the car here, see, cut the trans hump back out. You can see where we have the floor kind of marked out of where we want to start making the transition over. We're probably gonna go pretty liberal on the spacing. Not for clearance purposes, but for heat purposes, because the header is right there. We're gonna be putting some sort of heat foil on both sides of the floor, but I still want to have a little extra space because I am concerned about the floorboards getting super hot. Not that I'm in this for long periods of time, but I also don't want to scorch my feet when I'm wearing something like Converse at a local autocross. So just something to consider while we're in here. You can see the engine's back in here behind the Firewall. It's pretty interesting to see. It's when you're in the car here, it kind of looks like it's far under the dash, but it's not really. It's just strange seeing it in with the Firewall out of the way. T56 is good. The hump was tight on the one I did last year, so none of the angles really worked out, so we just cut it out. We're gonna start fresh with a new one. This is the cross member under the floor here, right behind where we cut. we'll clear all that. Can't really show it well under the car, but the tail shaft of the trans is clear as far as any cross members. The U-joint looks like it has good clearance on the floor. Because I'd made some modifications over the summer just to get some additional clearance on the U-joint right out of the tail shaft. It was a little tight on the floor. But we're all good there. The cross member for the trans, see if I can get under the car and show you, is going to work. See, it's bolted up back on that. We had to trim it a little bit. The cross member that's included in the Summit kit is 2 positions. You can face it in either direction, depending on what trans you're using. So we had to flip it 180 from how we had it before and cut a little bit off, just get it to clear on the trans. Still gonna be plenty strong. I'll show you guys once it's out of the car and like ready to be painted, but we had to notch that to get it to fit. So nothing too crazy really. I think the biggest pain of all we're doing related to the engine setback is gonna be up here on the cowl. It's super close on the intake, but where this is going to be part of a 4-inch setback, so we're going to have to cut this out, set that back 4 inches, and then obviously weld in a piece to seal it back up to the firewall, because this piece is right here, so obviously air, water, all that stuff will get in there, which I don't want to have a hole directly into the cabin of the car, so we're going to have to come up with something there. But yeah, nothing really too crazy here. We got good clearance on like the steering shaft, to the control arms, all that stuff. The headers are further back and off the brake line, so that's nice because I didn't like how close they were before. I thought about like rerouting it and stuff, but yeah, nothing weird. I was worried we were gonna have a bunch of like strange clearance issues that I couldn't predict come up, but I mean, it seems pretty straightforward. So we're happy with the setback. We're not gonna go any more, any less. I wonder if I can show it good on the driver's side. The gas pedal is extremely tight, and that's a big reason why I don't want to push the engine back even further. Is the gas pedal, even though it's changing to drive-by-wire, the position itself in the throw is really good for me in the car. And so with the way we're angling the firewall in, it's just barely going to clear, so we can keep it where it is, or maybe, you know, move it forward like a 1/4 inch just to play it safe. But I didn't want to have to shift the gas pedal like inches towards me, because I have pretty long legs and the pedals are in good positions, because obviously we did the pedal position based off of, you know, where I sit in the car last year to make it comfortable for me. So I don't really want to have to change that and redo all that, because I like how it is for the most part. So that's really all that's going on with the engine itself. Also the firewall came in, which is nice. Show a little bit of this. I haven't really talked about this yet, but got this from Summit Racing. Forget what company it is. I'll throw it on the screen if I remember it or can find it. But this is made for, I believe, Tri-5 Chevys. I think this is like for a 56 Chevy. Not that it's really that specific, since it's just a big piece of sheet metal, but this is a 4-inch setback. So from here to here is 4 inches, which is nice. And the plan is we're just going to weld this into the firewall. I don't think we're going to layer it on top of the existing one. We're gonna cut this and also cut the firewall as needed to mate the two together. Like obviously we're gonna have to cut some of this off because we need this pretty close up to the cowl to account for the intake here. But that should give us some nice access, probably like a 1/2 inch or so behind the engine. Just get in there, service it, have a little barrier of air to go around there, maybe do like some insulation and stuff. But that's really where we're at as far as mocking up right now. I think the next thing is going to be looking a little more at the dry sump tank, because right now we're kind of in the measurement and cutting phase. I want to do all that at once, that way we can just take everything back out of the car and get going on welding things into the car and start putting it back together instead of just cutting it apart. So that's really where we're at right now. Everything that needs to be mocked up is mocked up as far as the engine goes. So we're either gonna start ripping this out and getting going on the firewall, and I'll catch up with you guys then, or we're gonna do some more mock-up on the dry sump tank. So I'll catch up with you guys once we start working on something else. All right, so here we are about a week later since the last part of the video. Obviously the drivetrain's back in, but a lot has happened since the last section of this video. Didn't film too much of because it wasn't the most exciting stuff in the world, but I'll give you guys a quick recap of what we did. Now, last you guys saw, the drivetrain was in, we had the firewall cut out, we had the floors bent back a little bit, but it was very much just a rough mock-up of the engine and trans headers, see where we're at with everything, see if the setback was enough, stuff like that. Since then, we yanked the engine, headers, trans, all that stuff back out, and we really got deep into cutting stuff out and removing everything that we needed to get this to fit properly. So obviously you can see the firewall's tacked in now. Before we got to that phase, we actually had to cut the cowl out because that was really the big nightmare here. Since this area is recessed, it goes into the factory cowl, which obviously isn't going to work. So we cut all of that out from here all the way down to about where that seam is, where the new firewall starts. And the important thing with that is that you need that area fully sealed off. The cowl below it is the cab of the car, so you don't want to let air, water, debris get in there. So what we ended up doing was leaving a little bit of a flange, almost like how you'd replace like a quarter panel or something on one of these cars. With about a 1/4 inch flange from where we cut out. And then we had actually had a bunch of leftover sheet metal from just past projects. And we had a big piece that we were able to form here. And we broke it up into sections because it's radius this way, but it's also radius up to the cowl to seal up here. So we basically just worked it in sections, and I think we actually got a pretty good fit for doing this by hand. It's obviously not as nice as if we had like an English wheel or actual metal fabrication tools here, but it's not terrible. So what we did was, after we formed it and got all the contours right and got it all butted up, was tacked it all across the top. Didn't do any stitch welding or anything like that, just tacks. So it's just kind of typical for sheet metal replacement or fabrication. You don't want to risk warping stuff. So tacked it all across the top. There's a few pinholes and stuff that I tacked in as well. And then once that was all set, I went under it and then basically finished welded it by tacking it. So I did just a bunch of tacks, spacing out, spreading across the panel to dissipate heat, just like you would do if you're doing a quarter panel, stuff like that. Now the reason I just did tacks on the top but then basically finish welded it on the bottom was really structure. On the top here, obviously we have overlap, which doesn't look good, so we're going to grind all the tack welds and stuff down here, then body work this in with Bondo, just like you would integrate a replacement panel, just to hide it so it's not going to look like anything's here once it's painted. And so obviously you're going to be grinding down a good bit of the tack weld to get it pretty flush, or at least to a point where you can body work it and kind of blend it in. And this isn't the thickest sheet metal in the world, but it is structural on the car. So I wanted to just have good weld somewhere on it, so that's why on the bottom I decided I'm just gonna do a bunch of tack welds to get it fully welded together on the bottom, fully seamed, and then I'm just gonna leave those welds there because they're hidden, so I'm not gonna grind them down. There's really no point. So I know my welds on the bottom are nice and structurally sound, and then these ones are really just for holding it down, so I don't really care if they get thin when I grind them down. So once we had that all welded on the bottom, painted the bottom, obviously, typical prep, and then I just rattle canned it. Same thing with the back of the firewall here. It's gonna get coated when we repaint the inside of the car, so it's kind of just like a base layer. It's really mostly metal protection up in here. And then the back of the firewall and the axle cab of the car is gonna get repainted, so that was just a nice base layer. Same thing with rust protection. I don't want it to like flash rust while it's sitting, so painted back both of those before we put the firewall in, because once this is up and in, you don't really get access to the top of the cowl anymore. So that's why we went in and pre-painted it. I want good corrosion protection. I don't want, not that much moisture is gonna collect in between the firewall and the cowl, but it's nice to have the protection where it's not gonna instantly rust if any moisture does get in there. So once that was all set, we got the firewall up and tacked that in. Now, obviously you notice the firewall is cut down from the panel that we had. We had to make a few strategic cuts, like the start of the recess we had to cut probably 2 or 3 inches off. It was probably like 5 or 6 inches tall as far as that flange. So we cut that down to get that into a proper spot where we'll clear the intake, which worked out really well. And then the other thing was trying to get panel fitment as far as angles and getting everything level. Obviously we got the recess level, so we just kind of followed the contour of the cowl and did a bunch of test fits and mock-ups and measurements to make sure that was good. But the other thing was pitch side to side. So obviously you want it to be perfectly flat on the firewall. So at first we weren't sure if we are going to butt it up or lay it on top of the factory firewall. And we actually, if you look, we ended up doing both. And the reason we did that was because this is all 1/4-inch plate over here from when we did the master cylinders and steering column. And then over here is just the super thin factory firewall. And we found that butting it up on the 1/4-inch plate and then laying it on top of the firewall is actually what it took to get the firewall to sit flush. So obviously I would have liked to have butted it up or laid it on top on both sides just because it's a little more thickness. Butting it up, you're not getting the same material thickness as if you lay it on top of it. But it's not the end of the world. It's just not super thick metal through here, so it's not really ideal. I want it to be as thick as possible, but this is what we did to get it to work out. So we left this end on here just because we're not sure what we're going to do over here with the dry sump tank as far as, are we going to bring this over here and completely finish this off, or are we just going to cut it here and then do the plate on the inside and then just leave the outer edge open? So, that's up in the air. We're going to wait to do the dry sump tank until the firewall and trans tunnel are all done. I don't want to really jump around. I just want to focus on one thing at a time. When you jump around, you kind of lose trains of thought and then overlook stuff. So this is our main goal right now. So we're just going to stick to it until it's done, or at least the fabrication side's done, and then we'll work on fabbing that. Now, inside the car, we are working on a couple finish panels. Obviously you saw in the last part of the video I just bent the floor. Now it's all cut out, so we actually have the rough version of this piece over here. We've been test fitting it just to make sure we have good header clearance and stuff. It's still going to be pretty close to the header, which isn't ideal, so we'll use probably like the DEI heat foil just on both sides to help protect the floor from getting too hot. It's still going to be a little toasty, but I don't think it's going to be too bad if we have insulation on both sides. And obviously you can see our very crudely made trans tunnel. We're just playing around with different profiles and ideas right now, so we're just mocking stuff up with cardboard to get some rough measurements. Once we have an idea of what we want to do, we'll make it out of like poster board and then transfer that over to eventually making it out of metal. But we're very much in the beginning mock-up and design phase with that. Our radius tunnel we done before was okay, but like I said before, it was a little tight, and we're trying to see if we can be a little clever with the shape to give us better clearance, or try and integrate like a console into the floor, stuff like that. So just playing around with that while we're in here. We're taking the measurements so we know like the bare minimum we need to clear the trans, and then we're kind of designing around that, adding clearance as we feel we need to. Same thing over on the driver's side here. We need to make the closeout panel from the firewall to the floor. The debate here is whether we make a piece that goes from the firewall and then we bend it to match the cut we have in the floor, or if we just run it straight down and cut the floor. The main goal, like I said before, was gas pedal clearance on that. I want to make sure we have full range of travel for the gas pedal and can also leave it in the same spot. So that's going to be as simple as just putting the pedals back in. Now that the firewall's tacked in, we know exactly where it's going to be. And then, maybe make some pieces out of cardboard or something, put them in, and then see how that impacts the gas pedal. So it's just a lot of little stuff like that you need to consider when you're doing stuff like this, because if you don't, it's going to come back to bite you at some point, usually at the worst time. Nothing would be worse than we have everything painted, ready to go, and then the gas pedal can't get to 100% and I have to move it like an inch forward and stuff. So it's much better to take the time to think about that stuff now than, just kind of rush through it and have it come back to bite you. But we're trying to take as many measurements as we can with the engine in here, because hopefully this is going to be the last time it's in here before it gets finally installed. I'm hoping the next time we drop this in is going to be to actually hook everything up and start getting this thing running. So really the measurements, like I was saying before, just for those closeout panels in the trans tunnel, we measured side to side in the frame, angles, all that stuff, and everything surprisingly looks good. This thing sits center in the frame, even though we had moved the mounts and changed everything. Our angles all look good. I was waiting for something stupid to come up that we had messed up, or an oversight or something like that, but knock on wood, but everything looks good so far. So really happy with how this is going. So the next steps are going to be to yank this back out once we have all of our measurements and pictures, and then really just get going on finish welding everything. So doing a bunch of tacks to get that all fully integrated in, start grinding stuff down, body working at all that stuff, and then also obviously doing the dry sump. Under the car, we ended up trimming the trans cross member a little bit. I can show that to you guys, because if you remember earlier in the video, I couldn't get the header fully installed because it was hitting the cross member, so it was sitting off the engine, but now it's actually hooked up as it should be. So we had to trim over here. You can see the bottom of the header. You can see some marks with the paint marker as well. There's an extension tube that bolts to the end of the header, which has like the O2 sensor, and then that's what you actually hook up to your exhaust system. And that hits the backside of the cross member. So we're gonna have to go through and clearance that some more. The problem is we're starting to, take away some of the structural rigidity with trimming stuff now. So now we're gonna have to go back in and add gusseting in and stuff like that, which will probably be in the next video. The mock-up videos are probably gonna, be 2 or 3 episodes at least, because obviously there's a lot of stuff: test fit, measure, clearance, adjust, all that stuff. So that's really going to be it for this video. We got most of the sheet metal stuff done. Obviously, in probably the next episode we'll do some more of the finish work, so to speak, of closing out panels and getting all that in. But the really big stuff's done. Cowl is reshaped, so we got that all roughed in, and then we got the firewall, finally tacked in, which is really the big thing. This was the biggest thing we had to change about the car to actually get this to fit. And it looks awesome. All of our clearances look good as far as to the bell housing, the valve covers. We have tons of room to get in back here if we need to access anything, run wiring behind the engine, all that good stuff. So in the next episode, we'll probably do some more clearancing of stuff under the car, and maybe we'll get into adding in gusseting and supports, because that's really important. If you're gonna start cutting stuff up, you need to make sure it still has structural integrity and rigidity, especially when it's a transmission mount on a basically 700 horsepower engine. And then we'll probably also get into some of the finish work on this stuff, finish welding it, like I was saying, and maybe even doing the dry sump. It's should go pretty quickly from here. Most of the cutting, if not all of it, is done. Obviously we gotta maybe do some small trimming, but all the big stuff's done on this. So that is a successful start to the mock-up phase on this. It's going much smoother than I had hoped for. I thought we were going to be running into a bunch of nightmares and roadblocks and weird issues and stuff like that, but so it's exceeding expectations. It's going reasonably smooth for all the work we're doing. So hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Not the most exciting, but the mock-up phase is kind of a necessary evil. You really got to take your time and actually think this through and really plan stuff out in this phase, so that way once you're closer to being done and the car's actually out and running and everything works as it should, you really got to take time and think of anything that could go wrong, how you want to route stuff. All that stuff plays a role in how you lay this stuff out. So that it's good to think a couple steps ahead, how you're going to route wiring the sensors, how you're going to plumb stuff, any heat issues, especially if it's track car, are there any lines that are going to be near headers? If the airflow is traveling down the engine, and then down here, if it's a stock radiator set up on one of these cars, think about where the hot air is going to be blowing and what it's going to be blowing onto, all that stuff. Obviously every car is a little different, so you have to think about for your build what its purpose is going to be, how you're going to do things, what you want it to do, all that stuff. But yeah, that's all I got going for this first mock-up episode. If you liked it, feel free to leave a like, comment down below if there's anything specific that you guys want to see, if you have any questions, if you have any ideas, things like that. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. You guys seem to really be enjoying the swap series so far, and we're just getting started. This is going to be a lot more content coming on this, a lot more in-depth videos as we get further into the swap, and we'll be racing this thing hopefully sooner than later. But yeah, so I'll see you guys in the next one.